Thank you very much. Thank you, Joey, for the introduction, and to 3IE for having me. I'm happy to be here and to talk about what I think is a really exciting area for policy evaluation, satellite data. And I'm going to talk from the perspective of somebody who's not an expert in remote sensing, but rather a consumer of this evidence. And I think there may well be people in the room who know more about remote sensing than I do, and so I invite you to join the conversation as we move into the open questions. Maybe alongside mobile technology, there's probably no more promising tool for reaching hard-to-reach populations and marginalized populations in policy evaluation than satellites. Satellites enable consistent and repeated observations of proxies for a number of important economic indicators for every square kilometer of the Earth. And a few prominent examples include land use in forests, air quality, climate and weather, night lighting, increasingly crop yields, and urbanization in buildings. And I think one of the aspects of these data that make them so powerful is how accessible they are. So of all the examples that I cited, maybe with a couple of the more cutting edge examples, data sets are freely available online, and they're available in forms that are processed enough to be intelligible to social scientists and to be analyzed with data, with software that we all have either on our computer or we can download for free. And there's a growing literature in economics using these data in a variety of policy domains and settings. And this paper by Donaldson and Storygard from the Journal of Economic Perspectives is a really nice introduction to the promise and challenges of using satellite data in economic research and to some applications to date. An example from my own work that illustrates the power of this technology in thinking about policy and evaluating policy is outdoor air quality. Until about 5 years ago, policymakers, the press, and also academic researchers really considered the air quality problem that we see in many countries around the world to be an urban problem, and almost exclusively an urban problem. And I think that a lot of this had to do with the fact that the data on air quality that was available was largely available thanks to an exclusively or almost exclusively urban network of ground-based air quality monitors. And you really need only look at a map of air quality from satellite data to recognize that air quality is also a major problem in rural areas as far as hundreds of kilometers from major cities. And so what I want to do today is focus on the complementary aspects of satellite data for policy evaluation. I think it's not controversial in this audience to say that there are few settings in which satellite data would replace the primary survey evidence or administrative data that we generally rely on in the evaluation community. But I think there are very important areas where satellite data can provide a natural complement to this primary survey data and administrative evidence that we're used to relying on. And what I'd like to do with the remaining time that I have is to give two examples of recent impact evaluations, both of which were supported generously by 3IE, which are on policies addressing deforestation and illustrate the range of applications of satellite data in evaluations. And then I'll wrap up by making a couple of observations and suggesting two roles for satellite data in complementing survey or administrative data. Okay. I don't think that there's an evaluation paper out there that shows the power of using satellites more effectively than this paper by Seema Jayachandran and a cross-disciplinary group of collaborators in science from last year. And this paper is asking about the effectiveness of a payment for ecosystem services program in western Uganda that pays small landholders to conserve forests. And to illustrate the ambition of this project, the authors commissioned a private high-resolution satellite to collect imagery at baseline and endline. And this data is so high resolution that they can actually track deforestation tree by tree. In addition, they developed their own processing algorithms to measure deforestation, and they did this using machine learning and some on-ground measurement training data. In addition, they also collected baseline and endline surveys in the traditional way that we often do, and they find very convincing evidence that this conditional cash transfer for forest conservation reduced deforestation, and that it was very cost effective in doing so. And I want to contrast this by talking about some of my own work, which is also looking at deforestation, but in contrast to a randomized evaluation, we're trying to evaluate a national policy implemented in India in 2006 that sought to increase the scrutiny on, among others, the mineral mining sector. And therefore, we require high spatial resolution historical forest cover data for all of India. And so we use an off-the-shelf data set, which was developed in Matt Hansen and co-authors' 2013 paper, which is freely available, well documented, and widely used. And I'm going to show you an example of these data to try to wake everybody up after lunch. And I also want to point out, though, that there are real limitations that we've struggled with, and we're thankful to 3IE for being patient with us in the process, because we haven't done any on-ground measurement. And so we're very limited in the extent to which we can characterize mechanisms or the effects of the policy on communities. Okay, to show a brief example from our work, I will focus on one mine, which is in southwestern Chhattisgarh. It's an iron ore mine, and it's a relatively large mine. And this is the site prior to the development of the mine from Google Earth Landsat imagery in 2013. And if you look 2 years later, you can see the development of the mine. And then when we look in the Hansen data, you can see that this data set, which is global and not focused on India, but provides data for India, is extremely effective in capturing the deforestation that resulted from the development of this mine. And so to close, I want to make a couple of observations and suggest two roles where the evaluation community can both take advantage of satellite evidence that's becoming available and increasingly high quality, and also think about ways in which we can further the evidence that we can draw for policy from satellites. And the first is an observation from looking at these two projects side by side, and it is that in most projects, the right mix of satellite and other methods is probably somewhere in the middle between what we see in Seema Jayachandran co-author's paper and our own paper on India's environmental clearance process. And what I mean by in the middle is that most projects are not going to have the resources or expertise to fly satellites over their site and develop custom processing algorithms. But many projects can and will collect on-ground data that they can use to both validate the satellite data they're using and also aid the interpretation of the satellite measures that we see in existing data. And I think that this is a really important area for cross-disciplinary collaboration, because many of the satellite image processing algorithms that I mentioned before for air quality and for forest cover and for urbanization and so on are based on machine learning techniques that do rely on some underlying training data, which is from on-ground measurement. And so I think that there is a really exciting opportunity for the evaluation community and researchers in social sciences to look to the remote sensing community for guidance on how to collect the right on-ground data that can help to not only validate the satellite measures that we use, but also to feed back into the processing algorithms themselves to make them better and better suited to domains where existing on-ground data may be less high quality. And the second, and I think this is an important point, is that satellites can also help us address site selection and external validity concerns that are often critiques of randomized interventions and field evidence. And there are a number of papers that have tried to do this, and I think that we can hopefully have some more time to discuss this in the follow-up. But I would just say that taking advantage of the comprehensive nature of satellite data to determine how, for example, the sites that we select are similar and different to the external sites that we hope our evidence will apply to is an important area for us to be thinking about. So I'll wrap up there.